This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. Our first member and daughter night since the onset of the pandemic took place on June the 1st. Our speaker for the evening was Lieutenant Commander Calley Gray, 17-year veteran of the Royal Canadian Navy, who now serves as the Navy's Gender Advisor for Professional Conduct and Culture.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Lieutenant Commander Gray.
Thank you all for such a warm welcome. And thank you so much to RCMI for inviting me here today. It is a pleasure to speak to you. I'd first like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. All right, my name is Lieutenant Commander Calley Gray. It's my pleasure to be here today to talk about my experience in the Royal Canadian Navy. I'm 35 years old. I'm from Brookside, Nova Scotia, which is a very small community about 30 minutes outside of Halifax. I've been in the military, I guess it's now 18 years that I've been in the military. I'm a Marine Systems Engineering Officer, and I specialize in naval architecture, so the design of warships. And I've spent most of my career working in the Navy, either on ships or supporting ships. However, the last 2 years I've kind of detoured from the engineering stream and gotten into a relatively new field called gender or intersectionality advising, which I'll talk to you about more throughout my presentation. I know that there's a lot in the media about sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces, and it paints a picture that the military isn't a great place for women to work. And I just want to start by acknowledging that we do have a long ways to go in addressing sexual misconduct and culture change and creating an inclusive work environment. And it hasn't always been easy being a woman in the armed forces. I've had some amazing supervisors who really made me feel included and have helped me thrive. But I've also had others who were frustratingly misogynistic. But I'm here today to share my journey with you, the good, the bad, the ugly, and to answer all of your questions with honesty and openness. The truth is that I've had an amazing career in the Canadian Armed Forces so far, and I've been able to experience things that I would never have been able to in any other line of work. I've got a bachelor's degree from RMC, 2 master's degrees from MIT, head of a department on a warship. I've traveled the world. I've managed projects with massive budgets. I was a Navy diver. I competed with soccer at a national level. So I look forward and I'm hopeful for the future of the Canadian Armed Forces. D&D is showing a real commitment to improve, and I've seen a willingness to listen to outside experts, a willingness to change the way that we've traditionally done things, and a willingness to adapt and move forward. And it's all in an effort to make the Department of National Defense more inclusive, where all people, regardless of their race, religion, their gender, their sexual orientation, or their gender identity, can thrive. I joined the military right out of high school. I honestly didn't know much about the military at all, but I had fallen in love with the concept of the Royal Military College of Canada. I didn't really know where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to take engineering, and I liked that RMC seemed to offer, it seemed like a bit of a pedigree to be able to get a degree only if you were bilingual. And they put emphasis on academics, but also leadership and athleticism. And although I was unsure of where I wanted to go, I felt like you can never go wrong choosing the most challenging option, which is what I did. So I joined the military not knowing much about it, but I joined for this school. and I really drank the Kool-Aid. I got into everything. I became a true believer. I played varsity soccer. I got the good grades. I took on ambitious leadership opportunities. I was the equivalent of student council vice president. And by the end, shocking to me, I became functionally bilingual, having started from little knowledge in French at all. And so I really felt that RMC helped develop me as a person and as a leader. And it's not brainwashing, it's just leadership development. And while my other friends at civilian universities were struggling to pay for university through waitressing or working at fast food restaurants, I was getting paid. It was my full-time job to develop myself. After 4 years at RMC, I earned my mechanical engineering degree, and then I owed 5 years to the military. And at the time, 5 years seemed like a long time. And a lot of my friends were destined for jobs in the oil fields where they were making tons of money. So I was a little bit jealous. But then the oil industry dropped, and all my friends lost their jobs, and I was very, very happy to have the job security in the military. And looking back, I just figured, you know what, even if I get out after 5 years, people are going to be looking for someone with 5 years experience, and I've got no debt. The way RMC works is that you'll go there for your regular school year, and then in the summers, you do your military training, so that by the time you graduate, you're actually capable of contributing to the military in a meaningful way. So it starts with basic training, and this is something that everybody takes. It's kind of Army-oriented, but teaches you your basic leadership skills. And then I get into Navy-specific training, but this is training for every trade in the Navy, whether you're a naval warfare officer, an engineer, or your logistics. And at the time, we were sailing around on yags, but now they use these little ships that are pictured in the middle, and they call them orcas. And they teach you how to sail in these orcas, and you sail around Vancouver Island and all the Gulf Islands. It's a magnificent time. Then the training gets even more specific. So you do naval engineering specific training. So combat systems and marine systems engineers are put together on a general naval engineering course. And then lastly, after you graduate, gets even more specific. So marine systems engineers go to England. And we do a 4-month course in England where we have hands-on experience with machinery. I mean, training that was second to none. I didn't always know what I wanted to be, and I don't know if a lot of people do when they graduate high school. So when I joined the military, I joined as a maritime surface and subsurface officer. The acronym for that is MARS. I joined as a MARS officer, and I joined because I thought the name sounded funny, like I might go to space or something. But I still learned that that wasn't really the job for me, and that I was really much more interested in engineering. I ended up changing trades twice before settling on marine systems engineer. So it just goes to show that, there's a lot of flexibility even once you join the military, and we don't expect people to know what they want to do straight out of high school. Once I graduated, as a junior engineer, you spend a lot of your time on a ship. And this is because this is what distinguishes military engineers from civilian engineers, is that operational experience that you can only get through deployments and actually being on a ship. So I sailed on 3 different warships, HMCS Calgary, Ottawa, and Winnipeg. They're all frigates like what you would see in that top picture. And each time I went back to sea, I gained more and more responsibility, finally culminating in being the head of the engineering department on HMCS Winnipeg. And as head of a department, you are responsible for around 60 people on board. And my department, they monitored the machinery plant 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at sea and alongside. We maintain everything the ship needs in order to float and move. So all of your engines and your supporting systems, your electricity, your running water, your flushing toilets, that is all my department. And we also handle our response to damage control. So if there's any fires or floods, or God forbid the ship comes under attack, it's my department, and specifically me as the head of it, that directs the response to those emergencies. When equipment breaks, my team is the one that comes up with a plan on how to fix it. And while you're at sea, if you can't just repair by replacement, I really liked being involved in some of the creative solutions that we came up with to keep the ship going. On board ship, it's really important to find a balance between work and fun, because if you don't, you just end up working all the time. But there's a lot that the ships will do to help increase morale, and so I put a few of those pictures up there. So one is of what we call a swim-X, and it's when the ship will stop in the middle of the ocean and allow people to actually jump off the ship and swim around. That picture specifically in the bottom left was taken over Mariana's Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. And we were just swimming around the propellers. We also have a lot of fitness on board, so we'll have fitness equipment scattered wherever we can on board. And a lot of times people will just go out to the flight deck, and there's organized CrossFit classes and cycling classes and yoga. In the past, we used to eat really unhealthy on board because deep frying things is the easiest thing to do. But now we've turned to more nutritional food, so you'll see a lot of fresh fruit, fresh veg, so the food's really good. The picture at the top center there is me and my friend Irene, and this was during a full power trial. And the naval warfare officers were practicing evading torpedoes. And the way a warship does this is by going at full speed and snaking around, so doing really sharp turns. So you've got the wind in your hair, and as the ship turns, you get really close to the water, and you can feel the water hit your face. It was such a good time. And then the top right is actually a picture from when we were sailing really close to Christmas time. So we sailed right up until the week before Christmas. And so to help get people in the spirit and in the mood, we had decorated our machinery control room with snowflakes that were shaped like Star Wars characters and lights. I loved sailing on ship because you become so close to the people you work with that they start feeling like family. One of the other things I did on ship, and it's a secondary duty, so aside from my full-time role as an engineer, is that I was a ship's team diver. So as part of the Navy dive team, you have to take a course on how to dive, and it's a month and a half long, and by the end you have a certification equivalent to an advanced open water dive certification. But Navy divers are trained above a civilian dive certification, so they're trained to effect repairs underwater and even disable limpet mines that are attached to ships. I got to do some really cool things as a diver. I got to jump off the ship. I got to jump out of a helicopter. I even got to save a sea turtle, which is pictured here. So that was when we were just off the coast of Panama, and our helicopter had reported a sea turtle in distress. And it had been a slow day for drug interdiction operations, so so they sent in the dive team. And they sent us out. We had the coordinates of where to find this turtle. And it was a giant sea turtle. And the sea turtle was caught in a huge fishing net. And so I got in the water and we untangled the sea turtle from this net, and we pulled the net onto the boat. And I was shocked at, this sea turtle in the middle of the ocean was carrying around this huge heavy net. And I kept reeling in the net into the boat. And all of a sudden, a shark head came out at me, and there were 2 baby sharks trapped in that net that the sea turtle was lugging around through the ocean. So that's the picture there on the bottom right. Another cool thing that I got to do was that I got to represent Canada at an international sports competition known as CISM, Conseil International des Sports Militaires. A little known thing is that this is the second largest multi-sport event in the world next to the Olympics. And what happens is every country sends all of their best athletes who are in their military to compete internationally at different sports competitions. So I got to compete against all these different countries. It was pretty amazing, probably one of the proudest moments of my life, going out there and feeling like I was a pro soccer player. We get to do some neat things. The CISM Soccer team actually went in advance to Brazil and tried out the fields there before any of the professional teams got to use them. It was the military players who took the field first. In between my sailing, I decided that I wanted to go back to school and do my master's. And it had been a dream of mine ever since I was in grade 9, and we had taken a field trip to Boston, and we had toured MIT, and we had toured Harvard, and as I was walking through MIT, I thought, this is where I belong. Like, I'm gonna get back here somehow. I don't know how, because I can't afford it, but I'm gonna get back here. And so I decided to have a go at it. So I applied to MIT and I got in, and I got accepted for funding and sponsorship through the military. So I decided to take full advantage of it. It was the first time that I'd ever been given the freedom to choose my electives. And I went a little crazy, and I ended up completing 2 masters in 2 years. The classes all seemed so fascinating, and the professors were all people who are famous in their fields. So I was in my glory with all my like-minded nerd friends, and we were gushing over the teachers teaching our classes. And I couldn't get enough. Dr. Wurtzbicki is pictured bottom right, and he had been one of the lead engineers in Germany for BMW. But he'd also been a consultant for a lot of NASA spacecraft disasters. So his stories were amazing. I was a little nervous going to MIT because I had been 5 years out of school by that time, and I wasn't sure how well RMC had prepared me for the best engineering school in the world. But it turns out they prepared me pretty well. When I got there, I'm sitting in classes next to people who are certified geniuses. And I'm not a genius, and I'm not that smart, but I am a hard worker. And one thing that RMC developed in me was resilience and the ability to work and be okay with being uncomfortable and work through it. So I worked really hard to get caught up to the level where I should have been when I entered this master's program. And in the end, I taught my program with a 5.0 GPA. Apparently that's possible. So the picture that you see, the top left, is me with some awards and my family at my graduation. While I was at MIT, I had to do a thesis that was big enough to cover both of the masters that I had done, which was mechanical engineering and naval architecture. So what I did was I took the Mark V Special Operations craft that was used by the US Navy, and I redesigned the hull. My mission was to try to make this hull more efficient at design speed. And I was able to create a hull that actually increased the efficiency by 30%, which is a huge margin when you talk in terms with naval architecture. I also put in a submarine that I helped design up top. This was pretty cool because once we designed the submarine, we hooked it up to a VR headset, and you could walk through the submarine that you had just designed. I remember that there was a switch where you could turn off or turn on gravity. And if you turned on gravity as you walked through the submarine, if you got to some stairs, you would fall down to the next level. And it was really cool being able to walk through something that I designed. The ultimate goal of engineers is to become project managers. So you do all of this time on ship in order to gain real-time practical experience and know how products will be used on ship. But ultimately, they want you in Ottawa project managing. And I did have the amazing opportunity to work on a few projects in Ottawa and on the coast. So I put 3 up there, and these are 3 of my favorites. The first one was with the helicopters, where we used computational fluid dynamics analysis and wind tunnel testing to predict the safe operating windows for helicopters to land on a flight deck. And this was so important because prior to using simulations, the way that we would measure the safe operating windows to land would be to send test pilots out and just trial and error, which is super dangerous. And it would take a long time, and you have to do it under all these different weather conditions. It's dangerous, and it's expensive, and it's time consuming. But by doing this analysis, you cut back on the testing so much. So you'd save millions of dollars every time you go to sea to do this testing. The next picture is actually the only picture that I could find online of people bracing for shock, but this is the US Navy. When I was at our National Defense Headquarters, I was part of a team that had to reimagine what we call shock trials. So warships are supposed to be able to sustain damage. They're supposed to be able to survive in water even when there's explosions going on around them. The way the US Navy tests this is they take their ships out into the ocean and they set off explosives. It's harmful for the environment to do that, so we were trying to come up with a way that was less disruptive to the environment. So we partnered with a bunch of different NATO countries and we strapped an array of air cannons to the side of the ship and we set them off all at once. And I was part of a team that was leading a damage survey team. So we were on board. We'd have to brace for shock, and we'd wait for our ship to get shocked. And so the air cannons would go off, and you'd feel this huge explosion, and you'd have to hold yourself steady, and then you'd hear the command, unbrace, and then we'd run off and we'd look for damage. And it was, as an engineer, the coolest thing, because you could actually look at the nodes and see the bending nodes, and that's where the damage would occur with all the cracking. For an operator, this was a nightmare because their ship was being destroyed. I don't think that we'll ever have another experiment like this, so I was very happy to be involved in this one. And then the last picture is what I had been doing 2 years ago, which is managing work periods on ship, which includes everything from docking work periods to short work periods while a ship is sailing. Throughout my time in the military, I've been a fierce advocate for gender equality. This started when I worked at the National Defense Headquarters. So my first time working in Ottawa, I'm doing the project management, I'm going to work every day, and I find myself, at one point, I was in an elevator with a woman, and she was a commander and an engineer, and it was just the two of us in the elevator. And I remember being shocked and staring at her and creeping her right out. And I could tell she felt uncomfortable in the elevator with me. And so I felt like I needed to say something. I needed to explain why I was reacting like this. So I looked at her, I was like, ma'am, I'm sorry, I think I'm creeping you out, but I've never seen a woman engineer with your rank. And she's like, yeah, there's really not many of us. And then she walked out of the elevator, and I was so angry at myself for ruining my one introduction with like the highest ranking woman I had ever met in my occupation, that I walked up to a Commodore who was the head engineer in my trade that very day. I went to see him after work. Luckily, he was one of my close mentors, so he entertained this. And I said, Simone, I just creeped a woman out in an elevator, and I don't want this to ever happen again, but why don't we have more women? Like, why was I so shocked seeing this one woman who happens to be a commander? And he said, well, Calley, women just haven't made it that far yet. And I said, no, that can't be it. That can't be it. I already feel like there's barriers to my career progression, and I'm not even that high. I'm just a lieutenant. And he's like, okay, well, what are you seeing? So we sat down and we had a very open and frank discussion on what I saw as some of the barriers to women's career progression. And he said, you know what, Calley, put it in a presentation, present it to the Naval Engineering Council. So I spent the next couple months consulting with people in my trade, getting every woman's opinion. I didn't realize at the time that this is called a barrier analysis. And I presented it to the Naval Engineering Council, and to my surprise, they accepted every single one of my recommendations. And over the next year, I saw, for the first time ever, women be put on that Naval Engineering Council, so women having a say in the leadership of our trade. I saw women being employed in jobs that were informally known as kingmaker positions because they were so lucrative, but women hadn't been employed in them before, and suddenly every single one of them was filled with a woman. And I saw our career managers start talking about family planning and accommodating that. So I was pretty pumped. I that kind of showed me that even one person can make a difference and have influence in an organization as big as the Navy. And this is what sparked my interest in gender advising or intersectionality advising. When it came time for the Navy to nominate someone to go on the NATO Gender Advisor course, they picked me, which ended up being the luckiest thing that I could have asked for, because it made me highly deployable. There's not many people in our military who are qualified NATO gender advisors. One of the opportunities that was presented to me at the start of COVID was to go to Iraq and be the gender advisor for NATO Mission Iraq. And I took it right away. In this role, I worked with the Iraqi Ministry of Defense, and I advised their generals and all their high-ranking civilians on how to help integrate women into their defense team and into their military. This deployment was really eye-opening for me because I got to learn a lot about their culture and women's role in it. I got to travel around Baghdad and meet amazing and inspiring Iraqi women. I got to learn the best ways to talk to senior men about women's issues in Iraq. And ultimately, it was very humbling as well, because in many respects, we have a lot to learn from each other. I was very happy to have worked with them, and one project that I'm particularly proud of, Dave Shaw, who's in the audience today, actually helped me with, and it's the picture at the bottom left, where we coupled with Canadian experts, and we helped come up with a Women, Peace and Security course, which was particularized to Iraq. So we worked with experts in Iraq, civil society organizations, United Action Partners, to come up with this bespoke Women, Peace and Security course. And then we ran a Train the Trainer and trained all of their senior instructors from across their various defense educational institutions. And now, this year, we're going to see Canadian originated course material being integrated into Iraqi mandatory training curriculum. I was really proud of what we were able to accomplish in Iraq, but I was also very conscious of the leadership crisis that we were facing back home. So at the time that I was doing this in Iraq, news had broke about General Vance sleeping with a subordinate, and it seemed to trigger a cascading effect of sexual misconduct allegations against some of our top leadership. And it was frustrating for me because I believe that Canada has a lot to offer the world in terms of women, peace, and security, but in order to have any type of credibility on an international scale, we need to make sure that we're good at home. So in response to that, Canada stood up a new organization to address all forms of misconduct, including sexual misconduct, called Chief Professional Conduct and Culture. Oh, good. So Chief Professional Conduct and Culture is headed by Lieutenant General Jenny Carignan. Some of you may recognize her. She's actually been here at RCMI as a guest speaker, and she is an absolute rock star in the military world. This woman is everywhere. If you actually walk to the floor above us by the elevator, her uniform is in the cabinet on display, a uniform that she wore in Afghanistan. The picture that you see next to her is from the Canadian War Museum. If you go to the Canadian War Museum, you'll see a lot of pictures of men and very few pictures of women, but her portrait is up there. When she speaks to an audience, it kind of feels electric. Like what I imagine it would have felt like if you were in a room with Steve Jobs when he's announcing a new Apple product. That's the kind of reaction that this woman gets wherever she goes, and that's who they put in charge of this. And she's picked the biggest and brightest minds from across the forces to be part of her team. She's handpicked everybody. So I work for her, and I'm now her gender advisor. And I know that we have a lot to tackle. It is no small task, and there's lots of people who are skeptical of whether or not that we can do it and whether or not we can affect culture change. But I think that at this time, With the team that we have, it's possible. One of the things that I get a lot is, why will this time be any different than any of the other times that we've tried to change culture? And I think it's because now the time is right. We're pushing on an open door. We have support from the Prime Minister, from the Minister of National Defense, the Chief of Defense Staff, all the L1s. We have pressure from the public. Everyone wants to help make the defense team evolve to be an employer of choice for all Canadians. And also, we have to do it. It's not sustainable the way that we're progressing right now, where our military is made up of 70% white men. And those white men only make up 36% of our recruiting pool. So we need this. We need this in order to get numbers into our military and in order to help every member actually achieve their maximum potential. But we also know this time that we can't do it on our own. And we're not doing it alone. We're not doing it by ourselves. We have external experts, both domestically and internationally, who are helping us. We're aligning with civilian regulations. We've got auditors. We are consulting academics, and we're consulting researchers. We are consulting people in the forces and veterans, and we're honoring everybody's lived experience. I've had an unconventional career path. Having been highly educated and trained as an engineer, a lot of people have asked me why I've gone into gender advising. And I've really just been looking for ways that I can apply my skills in a way in which I'm passionate about, and in a way that I feel like I'm doing some good for the world. So now, when I think about how I want to spend my time, I ask myself, what is the world that I want to contribute to? What is the world that I'm helping build? And then I direct my efforts accordingly. So even when I retire, I want to be able to look back and know that I've contributed to something that is bigger than just myself and will outlast my career in the forces. So now I'd like to open the floor to any questions or comments. I'm happy to answer any of them.
I think we need to give you an applause first. I will be happy to take your questions or comments.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of women here of all different ages. So some are in elementary school, junior high, high school, and that's fine to ask questions too, because your questions are going to be a lot different from someone we hear of that's at university or is already working in industry, but happy to take any questions.
I'll go. I just wanted to know, after hearing you speak about all of this gender equality stuff you've been doing as a civilian, I guess, is there any way as a civilian would be able to get involved with what you're doing or support or even just educate ourselves more on what you're doing and how we can get involved?
Yeah, I think, so from our point of view, we want to learn from best practices. So if you're aware of any kind of best practices or want to share with us, what's working or what's not working with you, we welcome any of that kind of input. We have people that we reach out to. We have consultants, but we also have networks of academics who we pull from, and we have defense advisory groups that we consult. So as a civilian, if you want to help contribute to defense culture change, we welcome any and all input that you have. And there is actually a positional inbox for CPCC that I can supply you afterwards. So if you have any comments or suggestions on what we should look at, we're happy to do it. Yes.
One of the things I have always heard about women is that all these stereotypes people always telling them like, oh, you should be like an Asian cooking, or like, oh, you should either be a nurse or either be this, like, you can't be in here. Like, people can tell you that a lot of times when you're in your job.
It's interesting because I haven't necessarily heard people telling me directly that I can't be an engineer, but I feel it. I feel it. When I get to a new place of work and it's always mostly men around me, I feel like I'm being judged, and I feel like I always have to prove myself, and it takes time to earn their trust and respect. And I mean, maybe I'm being sensitive about it, but I feel like my male counterparts don't have to try as hard to earn the same respect. So I do find that it is a difficult road being a woman in STEM, and I think that that would be the same whether I was civilian or military, but it's exacerbated being in the military because there's just a lot more men than there are women. It's a great question. Go ahead.
This is probably an unfair question because I know you're immersed in your current duties, but have you been keeping an eye on any lessons learned out of the war in the Black Sea recently?
Me personally, no. General Carignan is a huge history buff, so she's probably has, but I am not so much a history buff.
No, I wasn't thinking history. This is happening. They just sank a ship. Several, in fact.
Yeah, so would it be lessons learned from a culture change perspective or from a damage control perspective?
Oh, damage control perspective.
Yes, so we do that. we collect a lot of lessons learned from other countries' ship disasters in order to improve our own damage control techniques. And we're always evolving the way that we respond to emergencies on board our ship and changing the way that, changing the equipment that we fit our ship with, or sometimes even changing the design of a ship, depending on what the threat is.
I was just, first off, I think that you're incredibly impressive, and I'm just in awe of your
Thank you.
But my question to you is, so what do you think that can be done to engage the youth, the girls that are going to become women that would potentially join the military? What can be done to engage those girls in order to change the environment, in order to make it less, white male dominated and more inclusive of everybody? And obviously you spoke about the culture and having to get past that. I studied equity studies at the University of Toronto, so I have a background with, intersectionalism and that kind of thing as well. And so what do you think is the best way to engage these women, to show them that this isn't the old boys club that it used to be, and that this is an environment where you belong and where you should want to be?
So I think that the first step is making sure that it's a safe environment for people to join before trying to encourage tons and tons of women and minorities to join. We want to make sure that we are offering a safe and inclusive environment. So we're doing a lot of work internally for that. And so it's not just we've got to do the work and we've got to rebuild trust within our own military community. We need to rebuild that trust with the public, which has been severely damaged. And I think it's only once we rebuild that trust and show the action that, and not just say the words, that we're going to have more women join.
Lieutenant Commander, you're in Ottawa now. What's called boats? As you started on boats, do you get back on the water, or do you ever get back to a ship?
So, as an engineer, I've actually outranked my position to be on a ship. So, as an engineer, the highest position an engineer can hold on a ship is head of department. And I've already done it. So, sadly, I can't go back to a ship anymore. I'm very interested in day sails. I would love to get on board an AOPS and eventually a JSS, which are new ships that we just commissioned. I'd love to see how they run. I'm super interested in that. And I'm very interested in the design of our next Canadian surface combatant. So now I can't deploy on a ship. There's no position for me anymore on a ship. But just out of interest, I'd love to see how they're still operating. Yes.
How do you feel about the military being able to handle the problems that they have with women and others on their own, as opposed to perhaps making it more civilian?
So I don't think we can handle it on our own. I think that, you know, once you're in the military, you get very institutionalized and you accept a lot of things as normal that you probably shouldn't. And you see this a lot even in our most senior ranks. So I don't think that we can do this on our own. And we have to rely on outside expertise to improve. It's interesting because apparently there's been some suggestions put forward about eliminating all of their senior positions and just purging them, starting anew. I don't think that that's the solution. I think that there needs to be a balance between, you know, keeping that experience that senior officers bring, but also balancing it with the realization that you need to be willing to recognize what we're doing and how it affects other people, recognize the problems we have, and be willing to adapt. And if we're not able to do that, we're definitely going to fail. As we move forward, I know that we're relying a lot on external expertise to help guide what we do and even monitor what we're doing. And we need that. So we cannot do it by ourselves. I think we've accepted this. And you're going to see it in the future. Even just yesterday was the release of the RBOR report, which is going to guide a lot of our actions moving forward. One of the recommendations from the RBOR report was the transfer of sexual misconduct cases to the civilian justice system. And so you're going to see that get done. So some things will go straight over to the civilian side, but some are just going to be kind of cooperation between military and civilian.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now and thank you for joining us.